Today's injury report brought to you by Cape Regional Health System. Dr. Kevin McHale with Penn Orthopedics. And Cape Regional Health Systems is the best for both worlds for a healthier life. For an appointment, call 609-463-CAPE or visit caperegional.com/orthopedics. We've got some good ones. You know, Doc, we've done this for a couple of years, and you always wonder, like, you know, how many different injuries are there that you've seen or not seen? And oddly enough, it's crazy how new injuries seem to pop up all the time. Some older ones that we need to get rehashed on, but some interesting injuries this week, including one Eagle on this week's list. And let's bring in Dr. Kevin McHale, who has worked with the New England Patriots. He's worked with professional sports teams. And let's bring in Doc on Malik Jackson, expected to miss the rest of the season with the Lisfranc injury. Now, we hear about this injury from time to time, but what exactly is it? Why that name? And why so debilitating? Why a season ender?
Sure, yeah. So the Lisfranc injury is a really tough injury for players to rebound from. And the reason is the Lisfranc joint of the foot is very important for push-off strength. The Lisfranc joint is where the metatarsal bones, or those bones that make up the arch of the foot, meet the bones in your hind foot. And every time you push off, a lot of stress goes across that joint, and it's really important that it's a nice and stable platform to push off of. So when players have a mild sprain, typically the ligaments get a little stretched, but they're not unstable. It can heal with a short course of immobilization and a boom followed by rehab. But if that joint dislocates or separates significantly, or there's associated breaks in the bones there, you typically need a surgery with screws to fix it, and it's a prolonged recovery. It's several weeks, not staying off it completely, several more weeks where they're partially weight-bearing, followed by sometimes a second procedure to get the screws out before getting back to play. And unfortunately, it's a several-month recovery timeline and typically season-ending, so I don't think the Eagles are going to be seeing Malik Jackson on the field later this year at all.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. And 31 years old. We'll see if he ever plays again for the Eagles anyway, because he's got an interesting contract. Let's go to Nick Foles. Broken left clavicle, disappointing. He threw the touchdown pass. And, what's the timeline on this injury, and what exactly, happens when you break the clavicle bone?
Sure. So as you saw with Nick Foles, he got tackled. You had that opposing player land right directly on the other side of his shoulder, kind of crunching him against the turf. And there's a lot of force that goes across the collarbone when that happens, and obviously can break. We saw a similar injury with Aaron Rodgers a couple years back, and he ended up missing about 8 weeks after the injury, and that was in his throwing shoulder. So fortunately for Nick Foles, this is his non-throwing arm, so that's a good thing for him. And we all have a soft spot for St. Nick as the Eagles' hero, so we're rooting for him to get back out there. But unfortunately, no matter what, it's going to take at least 6 to 8 weeks for this thing to heal, and then he's got a little rehab to get back on the field. Sounds like he's already been placed on IR, so he's looking at least an 8-week absence, and hopefully when he gets back out there after that time period, he'll be feeling pretty good.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate injury there. This is an interesting one. Dr. Kevin McHale with Cape Regional is with us for our injury report. Tyreek Hill, this is good for our fantasy football people out there that want to know, should I keep this guy on my roster? What do I do with them? This was really odd, unusual, taken to the hospital. Now, I've heard from team doctors, Doc, and you can comment on this, I guess, that very rarely do the players have to go to the hospital for something, but an unusual injury here. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Sternoclavicular SC joint. I'll go with that. Is the injury here, but is it odd to see a player have to go to the hospital? And what exactly happened with Tyreek Hill, and what's the time frame?
Sure. So first of all, yeah, it's definitely odd for a player to have to go to a hospital, especially for shoulder injuries, even the shoulder dislocation where the ball and socket joint dislocates. Typically, we pop that right back in on the sidelines, and definitely doesn't require a trip to the hospital. However, this is a much different injury. So actually, the same exact mechanism as a Nick Foles injury. He lands on the side, gets crushed by another player on top of him, but instead of that collarbone breaking, it actually dislocated. And as opposed to your typical AC joint separation where the collarbone kind of shifts away on the outside of the shoulder, this dislocates towards the chest where your breastplate is, called the sternum. So that's where you get the sternoclavicular joint. And when that dislocates, it's a much more significant injury. And the reason is if it dislocates posteriorly, which is towards the inside of the chest or backwards, like it did in Tyreek Hill's case, there's some really, really important structures back there. All the major blood vessels that leave your heart, your windpipe or your trachea are all there. So if that bone is compressing that stuff, it can actually be a really dangerous injury. That is definitely not something you pop back in on the sidelines. You go to the hospital, and he had it done under anesthesia. And not only, they didn't talk about this in the media or anything, but in general, when you do this reduction under anesthesia, you actually have a cardiothoracic surgeon available because if there's some bleeding that you didn't know about, you need them available right away to get that thing addressed. So now it does not sound like that was the case in Tyreek Hill's injury. There's no reports that he had any neurovascular compromise or anything like that, so that's great. So once they get that reduced, he just starts his normal rehab protocol, and hopefully it's only going to be a 4 to 6 week timeline or something like that where he's get back on the field. And as a fantasy player myself, I'm sure nobody's going to drop Tyreek Hill, so I think he's going to be staying on Raptors. But fortunately for him, they got it back in place and did all the right things for him.
All right, last one. I don't know that this is very common either, but Hunter Henry, it's very common that he gets hurt. He seems like he's had all sorts of injuries, but suffered a tibia plateau fracture of his left knee. Let me tell you, Doc, that sounds very painful. We saw Christian Yelich the other night dislocate his kneecap. Anything with the kneecap makes me, cringe to feel like what kind of pain those guys would be in.
Yeah, so tibial plateau fractures can be absolutely incredibly painful. We're talking about the top part of the tibia where it meets the femur to make your knee joint. J.J. Watt had a different type of tibial plateau fracture, which was displaced and needed surgery, and he ended up being done for the season a couple years back. Based on the timeline that the Chargers are kind of releasing at this point, it does not sound like he has that similar kind of injury. This more likely is the fact that he went back out and played the rest of the fourth quarter and again in the overtime, actually, and it sounded a little later, most likely on an MRI, means that he probably had a non-displaced fracture that wasn't detected on X-ray, but showed up on MRI. And when that happens, it fortunately can heal non-operatively. We'll definitely need a period of rest in it. He's not going to be playing football for several weeks while that bone heals, but it's very different than that J.J. Watt injury where you're done for the season after having a surgery. So big injury, definitely going to be several weeks out, but a little bit better than that ACL he had last year.
All right, that was a great look at some very interesting and, unfortunate injuries. But, man, it seems like every week we learn some new things here with Dr. Kevin McHale with Penn Orthopedics and Cape Regional Health System. The best of both worlds for a healthier life. For an appointment, call 609-463-CAPE or visit us at caperegional.com/orthopedics. Great breakdown this week, and the Eagles kind of made it okay. They had the one big injury, but hopefully we don't have to do a whole heck of a lot, and we'll catch up with you again next week, Kev.
All right, sounds good. Hopefully after another big Eagles win, we'll see.